and welcome to this week's episode of the Marina Perry podcast. As always, it is such a privilege and an honor to have you viewing and listening and tuning in on whatever platform you are. I'm super juiced. I know I say this all the time, but I'm very excited about this week's guest, partly because it's one of my favorite topics. Since I was a little girl, I've been fascinated with astrology, but mostly because it's my beloved soul sister, Pippa Clare, who is joining us today. And I'll share a little more in a minute about how Pippa and I met. But so that you know, Pippa is a highly qualified expert in so many modalities: yoga, Pilates, meditation, Ayurvedic teachings, and astrology. So she is just a magical soul. And I'm so grateful, Pippa, for you joining us today on the episode.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And she's also a mama bear now to Oliver. And we actually met Pip, I forget, would it be 5 or 6 years ago at our yoga teacher training, maybe even longer.
Longer,
And
I think. Yeah.
we just bonded fast and hard. I think to the jealousy of my partner at the time. He was like, "What about me?" And I was like, "Pippa." And we always talked about, you were the blonde to my brunette. Pippa had this wild, beautiful, curly blonde hair. And still there, I can see it in the background. Yeah. But and we did our yoga teacher training together in Bali. And actually what was really funny to me at the time, and I don't know if you share this reflection, Pip, is that we were so similar in our story, like our backstory. It was very different characters, but our life learnings and our kind of, I suppose, almost like our pain contracts, if I can go there so quick in this conversation, were so similar. And yet, different characters and different details, but there was just such a coming together of souls that we just mushed into one, and we're hard to separate. And I love you so much. And we barely see each other. Well, now you live on the other side of the planet, but I just, for me, and I know I'm speaking for you, but I feel like that's just, we don't have to see or talk to each other much to know that we're always there for each other. It's that kind of relationship.
Yeah, it's a bond.
It is, and it's a beautiful one. And if you're listening, just drop in and express gratitude for the people in your life who you have that with. That you don't have to be talking to every week to keep that connection, but you just know that if you really needed them, they'd be there for you, because it's a soul connection. So Pippa, let's dive into the first two questions, which are always the same. So firstly, what animal would best represent your way of being, your personality, your energy, and why?
Oh, wow. That's a cool question. I love that question. Give me a moment. I feel like there's two. But
Go for two. You can have it all.
I think a horse is one of them. Partly because I grew up with horses and I have like a deep bond with that, but just they're gentle souls, they're loyal souls. They're free and wild, but also can be gentle and soft. So I really bond with that. Yeah, I think a horse. But also a turtle, believe it or not. That kind of, I guess, that ability to like go with the flow, float on the ocean, not be, turtles to me just seem like peaceful creatures. They don't tend to be so bothered by things. They can kind of stay constant no matter what's going on around them. So I think both of those.
Yeah.
One on the earth, one in the water.
Yeah. So Pip, what about if you could pick a superpower to have? What superpower?
Easy.
And why?
Pause time.
A pause time.
Pause time.
I don't think I've ever had anyone ever say pause time.
Yeah, because you can just hit pause. And I think sometimes it'd just be really nice to be able to hit pause and just spend a little bit more time in the moment yourself, and then be able to check back in, or to take some time out for yourself and be able to check back in, but without anything else having shifted or changed. Like just hit a pause button, but able to be present still yourself, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I'm not on pause, but the rest of the world is on
Yeah, I
pause.
do. I see what you're saying. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the perfect answer from a meditation teacher, right? Yeah. Expanding the present moment. I love that. And so, you know, without giving too much of your personal story away, which I'm going to ask you to unfold, even talking to you today, and I know it's late where you are, you're in Chicago, and you've just popped your little Bubba Oliver to bed, and you've made time for us, and I really appreciate that. But when we first connected, I think we were both coming out of such chaotic times in our life, and we were such yang energies, but we were both seeking more of that yin, you know, more of that feminine receptivity, because we were both powerful creators. And so I would love you to share in your own words, you know, now we were both called to yoga at the same time, but you've gone in a slightly different path to me, and yet we've both gone deeper, I think, into, let's say, more away from science, and we're going to unpack a bit more of that, and a bit more into what some might call quantum science, or some would just call woo, but that kind of more unknown, that kind of more creatrix space for you, Ayurvedic, meditation, and astrology. And I'd love to hear from you. How did you get to be an astrology teacher and a Ayurvedic teacher and a meditation teacher from the Pippa that I knew many, many, many years ago? How'd
Yeah.
you
Yeah, I think when we both met, you're right. We were both in such a kind of yang energy. Everything was fast. You and I are both very deep in business, and it was just like this go, 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 go. But I think when I came back from my yoga teacher training, things started to unravel for me in a way that I just didn't expect. And at the time, it was incredibly challenging. And that's a whole big story that I'm not going to dive into. But essentially, the things that I knew and the things that I was, I guess, comfortable with all got stripped away just one by one. You know, like the house went, the husband went, the cars went, the business went, everything just kind of back. And yeah, it was incredibly challenging, but it kind of forced me. It forced me into a place where I had to go within, in like a big way. I had to really take time to like assess where I'm at, you know, what my values were, what I was prepared to fight for, what I was prepared to let go. And I guess it was almost like a bit of a death and a rebirth kind of scenario for me. Like a lot of stuff had to just, you know, cease, and a lot of things had to kind of be transformed or reborn. So it was a heavy time. And then out of that, I blossomed into a completely new, I guess, space within myself. And through that, I attracted a new partner who I met at yoga. And a long love story to do with that. But it led us to getting married and having a baby. And I think for me, being pregnant is when I really, like, there was a big shift. Like I had to slow down. I had a bit of a higher risk pregnancy. So I was forced to pull back from that very yang energy. And I really had to learn to be comfortable with being still and doing less. And I think that's when my meditation practice really had to step up. And I really had to be a lot more internal and really feel into it. And then post Oliver being born, when he was 5 weeks old, we moved to a foreign country. So I had a 5-week-old baby, Chicago winter. They just had like a polar freeze. So it was -30 outside. Like I was literally in a house on my own, no friends, no family, you know, like it was like going into a cave. And it's like I guess I was forced to have to do the work, like do the internal work, do the inner work, because there was no external distractions. There was nothing externally for me to do. There was nowhere for me to go. I just had to kind of sit with it and be with it. yeah, which at the time was incredibly challenging, but in hindsight was the biggest gift I've ever been given, because as someone that's always, I guess, pushed and drived, and I've always been a doer, had I not been forced, I don't think I would have done it, because there would always be something else for me to be doing. So like this really forced me, because I couldn't, I physically couldn't. Yeah.
And so then I think that's very true for so many of us. It certainly was true for me. And I feel that with my clients that I work with that are women in their masculine, or a do or projecting energy, um, because we're so well trained in that, and even as Source has described it to me directly, is kind of like, we've had to take from you that which you thought you couldn't live without, because that's when we get to really re-identify with the truth of us, which is that we can be anything and we can experience it all. But when we over-identify with it having to be a certain way, it does feel like a death, because the lack of that is a lack of certainty, or a lack of knowing that you'll be okay and safe. And I think you're right, that those of us that are almost strongest in our patterns, need to be pushed into that corner where it's like, all right, I surrender then finally and at last, because until then we just find another way through. We just find another way to recreate the busyness or the hecticness or the essentialness of essentiality, or what's the word I'm looking for, like the illusion of the necessity of our way of being.
But I think it's also the fighter in you, which is like, I see a challenge, I can overcome that.
Yes.
I see that, I can deal with that. Yep,
Yep.
bring it at me, I can do that. And so it really took like, I always talk about it like the gentle knocks. And then all of a sudden for me, it was like a sledgehammer. Like there was literally nothing I could do but surrender. And I think without a sledgehammer, I wouldn't have done so. I would have stuck at it, because I pride myself on having grit, having to do hard things. Little did I know the hardest thing to do was to do nothing.
To do no thing, yeah. Especially when we're identified as achievement, beings, as this world tends to want us to be identified as. And I love what you're saying. And for those who are listening to, Pippa went from Perth to Chicago. So that's like, positive 30 degrees Celsius to negative 30 degrees, I'm sure. Crazy. So then what called to you, out of Ayurvedic and meditation and astrology? Like why? Because I know that you, like me, we're learners, we're students, we're constantly in the curiosity, like that's our superpower. But then why that and not, I don't know, midwifery or, naturopathy or anything else? Like why those things? And for those listening, I'm not really asking for Pippa's answer as to why we should do those things, but rather how she attuned to her alignment, because that's what you did, right, Pip? That's what it's about. So can
Yeah.
you share with us that part of the journey?
Yeah, I think I used to place a lot of value in security in external things, and we'll talk about this as we talk more astrology, but I'm a Taurus moon, so like I like so are you, by the way, but I like my security, in like physical, tangible things. And so when all those things got taken away and I couldn't have that sense of security provided to me by those things, I had to go looking to find a new sense of groundedness, a new sense of security, a new sense of home, being uprooted from your home and put in a foreign country. Even though I was in a physical home, it didn't feel like I was home. So I guess my initial reason for turning to something like meditation was to find that home within me, find the security within me, find my solid ground within myself, so that I could be grounded to be able to be a good mother to this 5-week-old infant that I had. And I mean, I've never been a particularly anxious individual, but combine all those things and some postpartum hormones, and I found myself in this constant sort of anxious state. And I remember having this feeling. Jake, my husband, we'd been home for maybe 4 days, had to go and do he's a pilot, so he had to leave, and he was gone for like 4 days. And I remember sitting on the couch with Oliver, and he was feeding, and it was snowing outside. Jake had left, and I'm like, God, I'm alone. Like, I am 100% alone. I don't know a soul within thousands of miles radius. I can't call Jake even if I want to. He's in the air. Like, I'm alone here. And I remember having all these like crazy like scenarios come up in my head, like, oh, what if I fall over in the shower and I crack my head open and something happens to me and no one finds us for 3 days, and like all these crazy sort of anxious things. And I was like, okay, I've got to get a grip. Like, I've got to get a ground. I've got to find solid ground. And I don't know whether you call it intuition or what it is, but I just knew that the only way I was going to find that was to go inward, and to find that for myself within myself. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but I guess the more I sort of dived into that state, the more, call them downloads, I was getting to kind of go deeper. And I remember doing this meditation once. This like message kept coming through, like, look to the moon and the stars, look to the moon and the stars. It's there. It's there that you'll find who you really are. Like, go there. And I was like, okay. And then that kind of was like a little inkling. And then I talked to a musician that I was working with before I fell pregnant, and he had mentioned to me that he worked with an astrologer. And I just, for whatever reason, that conversation came to mind. So I reached out to him, and he put me in contact with his astrologer. And the insight that she was able to provide me and the accuracy at which she was able to give me just blew my mind. Like, it's like she could look into my soul and tell me more about me than I knew. It was jaw-dropping. And I guess at that point I was obsessed. I was like, I have to understand. I have to understand more. How can you possibly know these things, and timing of things, and
And we're going to dive into astrology now, but before we do, I just want to pause, because I think what you shared just then, and thank you for sharing your story, I appreciate that. And I know lots of women who are either becoming mums or have been mums can relate to that. It is a very definite thing hormonally, and the way the mind, and I think it's on an what's the word I'm looking for, evolutionary level too. I think the mind is hyper vigilant in those stages, because I remember the same thing. I would visualize the weirdest of things occurring, even thinking of someone having my child on a balcony. I remember I would just be like, what my brain would immediately next conjure. And again, not someone who would relate to obsessive or anxious thoughts outside of that situation. But what I love that you shared there, Pip, because if you haven't yet really gone on a similar journey to Pippa and I, when you hear people talk about downloads, you kind of think that it's all a bit crazy and, like they're tapped into some channel. And what I'd love to invite you to consider, if you're listening today, is that when we still ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, energetically from the busyness that this modern world encourages us to stay distracted by, what you get to hear and sense or know, aka the download, is your truth. And I work with so many people around, I don't know what I want to do. Well, of course you do. Who but you could know? I don't know what I'm here to do. Well, of course you do. Who but you could possibly know? But we are not in the practice, and it's simply that we are not in the practice of sitting with self, sitting with soul, sitting in silence, sitting in stillness, in whatever way that looks and feels for us, to even create the space to hear something different. But when you do, you will just suddenly get the signs and be guided, as you just said, Pip. Like, it's like, well, it's not even like one big thing. It doesn't just land necessarily, but it's like, oh, well, then I felt called to, or then I was guided to. And it's almost like next thing you just know you are, because
even when you hear those things, sorry to interrupt you, but like even when I was hearing those little downloads, like I had no astrology.
Mm.
It just sparked a sense of me, like curiosity, like
Mhm.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? You know, and so that just sent me down the road of curiosity.
So let's dive into astrology. But before we do, just for the people who are like, but I can't meditate, because I have some beautiful friends that have never meditated a day in their life and are like, oh, I just can't meditate. And I know my partner and I, quote unquote, meditate very differently, and our experience of meditation is very different. But I'd love to know, as a meditation teacher, what would be your top three either tips or just please know this about meditation or advice around getting started that might help people who are like, I could never meditate. And you'd be like, hey, boom.
I mean, look, I think some of the most important things I learned was to debunk some of the myths around meditation. So the first one for me was I always thought that when I meditated, everything would go silent. Like my mind would turn off and everything would be silent, and I'd drop into this peaceful abyss of quiet. And that's not the case. The mind doesn't just switch off instantaneously. And so I think a lot of people get discouraged with meditation because they're like, well, I can't do it. I can't do it. Well, one, you can't force it. So if you're trying to do it, then you're not doing it already. Like, stop. You know what I
That's
mean?
already a fail.
Meditation is not something you do, for one. But like, if you notice your mind's busy and you notice there's lots of thoughts, that's a normal part of meditating. That's a normal process in meditation. And like anything, if you train a muscle, you get better at it. It's the same thing. If you practice meditation, you get better at it. And so gradually over time, the thoughts slow down, they get less, the gaps between each thought get bigger. And the moments of silence that you're chasing or looking for start to happen. But, to think that we're just going to close our eyes and boom, there it is. Like, that's not the case. So the only way to find that is to practice. And it takes a lot of people years to get there. But for me, just showing up every day and doing it, every time I practice, you notice something different, you notice an improvement. So that's one.
Mm.
Um, the other one is meditation, or when you meditate, you get what it is that you need from that meditation that day. So, like, a lot of people say, oh, I meditate and I fall asleep. Well, maybe your body was really fatigued and just needed to rest. And so, like, that's okay. Like, if you fall asleep every now and then in meditation, that's not a problem. If it happens all the time, then chances are you probably need to check in with your lifestyle and look at why you're so fatigued and tired, and why, when you do give your body the chance to rest, it completely falls asleep. But on the odd occasion, that's actually really normal. And that's just, you're getting what you need in that moment. Um, so don't feel like you failed if you fell asleep. Um, And yeah, I think there's different ways you can meditate. Some people like to focus on the breath. Some people like to use a mantra. But the whole point to those tools, the whole point to a mantra, the whole point to using breath is it's like a vehicle to take your mind from activity to silence. So it's like it's something you can focus your attention on so that you can pay less attention to those constant thoughts that just go over and over and over and over in our minds. So it doesn't matter what you choose. What matters is that you choose to put your attention there. So if it's the breath, if you notice your mind start to race, you take it back to the breath. If you notice your mind start to race, you take it back to the breath, and you just keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things start to slow down. So I mean, there's lots to it, but at the end of the day, it's also incredibly simple.
Yeah.
And like anything, it just requires us to turn up and practice. And
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And for some people too, like I know for myself, because I'll be honest, meditation, of all the, let's say, elevation tools that I like to use, um, it's the one that kind of source keeps directing me to use the most, and that I'm the most resistant to, even though I now meditate daily. Um, But when I think back, I think for me, sometimes even a moving meditation, because I was so yang, was the best starting point, whether it was just a repetitive run and focusing on my breath and just kind of that, or swimming. That to me was easier initially. And also guided meditations, like allowing myself to be guided by someone's voice so that crazy busy mind of mine could feel like it was still doing something. So I just throwing that out there for the real beginner who, couldn't probably have been more resistant than I was back in the day. So stick with it, as Pippa
Same.
suggested.
I was exactly the same. Swimming was my moving meditation of choice for years because it's silent in there and you can't talk in there. And, I'd focus on my breath in the water. But it's a beautiful tool when you learn to use it.
Yes. Okay. So now astrology. Now I was raised by a mother. We just had astrology books all around the house. And I was raised knowing that I was a Leo and that my dad and my sister were Aries and my mother was a Libran. And we had those books in the house. And so growing up, I kind of would hear personality traits thrown around. And I think I had my first full chart reading. It was actually a shamanic full birth chart reading, I think in Bali, actually. And it blew my mind, much like you're describing your first reading. It blew my mind. I was like, what? This is like you're describing me to the T and you're describing my life. And then I think the next was a Gotish or an Ayurvedic kind of, yes, astrology chart reading. And again, the things that got shared, and particularly, that they didn't know. And I know people will often have similar experiences if they go to a clairvoyant, like the same kind of disbelief as to the accuracy, because we're not kind of often trained to believe that we can be known through other parts of our being other than our past or our current behavior. And so for me, astrology has always been something I've been very open to, even though I have my formal education is science-based. And I would love to really just have this straight up conversation with you, because I know a lot of listeners who have tuned into this will be right on the astrology train. And then there'll be others who are like, really, and I will say this, I've never been a daily astrology reader. Like I don't read the what's happening for Leo this month in the back of Cosmopolitan or something. I never read that. It was more and more about the personality traits. And then when I finally had a birth reading done, then more of the other pieces made sense to me. But when people say to me, but astrology, it's all just made up. Part of me and my response has always been, well, like everything in this galaxy literally impacts everything else. This is my take on it, but I'd love to hear a formal astrology response to this question, right? So this is just me, layman's terms. I'm like, everything affects everything. We know this. Like you literally, all the planets are held by the magnetic, we live in an electromagnetic universe, and the sun and the moon all play their role and we all cycle around each other. So obviously we're in relation to each other. And then when a child is birthed into this timeline, we're birthed as almost 90% water. And the moon, we know the moon has effect on the tides of this planet. That's what the tides are. Every, literally multiple times a day, we're having the effects of that planet. Just the moon affect the tides on this planet. And so if I'm made of 90% water, it makes sense that based on when I'm birthed, wherever that moon is and wherever those other planets are, there's going to be an imprint or an impact as me joining that cosmos in that moment of time, or as any soul joining that cosmos in that moment of time. And perhaps I never really thought any deeper than that, but I'm like, that makes sense. And then because all of the reports and for different people, not just me, have made so much sense, I've kind of just not needed any extra explanation. But I'm curious, as a trained astrologer, when someone says to you, oh, but astrology is just made up fluff, or that's just a bit of woo, do you even bother to respond to that, to a disbeliever? Or what would you say to a disbeliever or someone who's like, how does this really work?
Look, I'm not the sort of person that's here to convince,
Yeah.
I'm here to share, and I'm here to share the knowledge that I have. And it's very much up to the person receiving what I share with them as to whether they want to take it on board or not. So for me, there's certain things, like I'm very much the same as you. I've steeped in science. I love science. I've taught science for years. My background is science. But I guess what I've started to learn or to understand is there is things that are a felt experience that cannot be explained away in a scientific journal or it's at a deeper level of consciousness than that. And even those words for some people might be a bit like, what do you mean a deeper level of consciousness? And that's a whole nother topic, but it sits in a realm outside of the realm of science and data and in the realm of more a felt experience. So I think one of the reasons why perhaps there isn't as much literature is because those that follow things like astrology, I don't need a piece of paper or a scientific journal to tell me if it feels right or wrong. It's a deeper knowing at that point. So no, I don't try to convince, I just share. But I guess for me, I came from a very similar approach to you. If we break it right down and we take it right back, we are all just vibrational energy, all of us as beings. There's very little difference between a human being and a tree. We're made up of the same molecules. Essentially, it's just that we're expressed outwardly differently. So we're all interacting on this planet with each other as vibrational energy. So how can these giant planets, the cosmos, the moon, the stars, these huge energetic bodies not create some kind of impact on our state of being, be it our current state of being and be it our blueprint or our birth chart at the time we were born? When I really, dive into that, I'm like, well, it has to have a deeper resounding effect to think that we're separate. I mean, separateness is such a huge is the problem. The fact that we believe we're separate is the problem. So for me, it's about understanding that we're not separate and everything around us, be it the moon or the sun. I mean, we wake up with the sun, we go to bed with the sun, we rely on the sun. It dictates the weather, the moon dictates the tides. Like there's so much tied in to just those two things. And then the other planets that we speak about in astrology are just as impactful and are just as influential. So I find it funny that you and I actually haven't this at all yet. Our reasoning to get there is almost, well, basically the same. Yeah. So
okay, so let's just assume that anyone who continues to listen is on board to either learn something new or dive into something they're already passionate about. So thank you for sticking with us, because one of the things that I'd really love people to know about astrology, but I'd love you to share the unfolding of it, is a lot of people will say, well, I'm this star sign, and then they'll state their sun sign. And to a lot of people, that's actually all there is to astrology. Well, I'm just a Leo, or I'm just a Gemini, or I'm this or I'm that. And then they look at those traits and they either, distort them into being them if they feel they're not really matched, or they disregard astrology. Or if there are some similarities, they're like, yes, astrology is so on point because look, this is me to a T. But the truth is there's 12 houses and there's so much more going on. And this is what you do. And actually, for anyone listening, I actually, when my daughter turned 13, Harlow, she just had her first full astrology birth chart reading, but done by Pippa. And I know you went above and beyond in your delivery there, and she had a very interesting chart. But I wanted to unpack the 12 houses just as quickly as you can explain that, or at least rising moon, whatever you think is relevant, to kind of show there's so many shades to astrology. And this is why two people can be Leos but be very different or we are still unique individuals. And then one thing I'd also like to, I'm just going to peg hold this for a little bit later, Pip, but this conversation or this query about, if we have a birth chart, which is when we come into the cosmos as part of the cosmos, how much is it dharmic and karmic and pre-planned and fated? And then how much free will do we really have inside of that? So just, I'd love to have that conversation, but I'll shelve it for later because I know it's
Yeah.
intense, but we'll put that there. But can you please explain what is a birth chart and how is it different to the star sign, the sun sign that people may presently relate to?
Yeah, absolutely. But just one thing while I remember too, that I mean, you've got to remember that astrology is like ancient wisdom. It
Mm.
dates back eons. This is not something that's just been pulled out of thin air. So, you know, when you really, and I mean, as far as like my understanding of the ancient roots, I'm in my early stages of discovering that. But like the more you dive into it, the more you realize that people have used astrology as a tool for all kinds of things, from medical to, you know, weather patterns to, you know, I don't like saying predicting the future, but understanding what's coming, you know, or what's been, like they've been using that as a tool for eons, you know, and I think it seems new to us, but in ancient cultures, it's not new.
No.
It's been there. So anywho, aside from that, look, a birth chart is essentially, it's your blueprint. It's the placement of all the planets at the time you were born. So most people, like you said, when they think about astrology, they know their sun sign. But the thing is that your sun sign or your sun is not only influenced by the house that it sits in. So there's, like you said, there's 12 houses, and each house represents like a different part of us or a different aspect of life. But then there's also its relationship to the other planets. So, for example, if your sun is in aspect, so aspect is basically an astrology term for like in a mathematical aspect equation to another planet, that's going to have an influence. So if your sun is sitting next to or close to a planet, we call that a conjunction. And so what that means is that, you know, say it's Uranus is next to your sun, then it's going to bring Uranus energy to your sun sign, which is why if you would say, I'm a Leo, and there's all this stuff about a Leo that you go, yeah, I really resonate with that. But there's this other side of me that Leo doesn't explain. I'm positive if you started to delve into that Uranus influence, you'd be like, oh, there it is. Like there's that influence, there's that energy. So when we look at a birth chart, we don't just look at the individual planets. We look at those planets in relation to the signs, the houses. We talk about the modes in. So there's 3 modes. We talk about the element it sits in. So earth and fire and water and air. So whether it's an air element or an air house, you know, if you've got a fire, for example, sun sign like you, Leo, but it's sitting, say, in the 12th house, which is a water house, then it's going to mute that fire. You're not going to express like Leo. In fact, you probably won't feel very Leo at all because the 12th house is very much a water house and it's ruled by Pisces. So when we look at a chart, it really does the level of insight and detail that it can bring. Like I said, for me was mind blowing. And I've done so many readings now. And, you know, every time I do a reading, I'm just like, wow, like that, the information that comes through describes that person to a T. I couldn't put that chart on any other human being on the planet and it makes sense.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know if we're going to see I do want to, I think what you've just said is super important for people to know, because a lot of people will go, well, how can everyone be the same that's a Leo? And as you've just described, it's a cosmic fingerprint. And if you've ever seen a chart shared or the maths behind it, you would no longer think of it as not being scientific. In fact, you'd think of it as you've described it as ancient science. It's very mathematical.
It blows my math brain every time I do one.
Yeah, the geometry of it, the ancient geometry of it's phenomenal. So like you actually do need a high level of cognition to be able to read these charts. And just to share an example, because I remember you just reminded me, when I had my most recent chart read, it was well after my divorce, but it was in my relationship house. And I'd love to get your perspective of this with my chart at some point too. But and I forget now, I have it all written down and I have the recording somewhere. I forget which house or what was of influence in my relationship house, but essentially the interpretation of this, as it was described to me by someone who knew nothing about my life, kind of said, listen, you know, your first major relationship is you've got this equals separation in your relationship house. And I was laughing. I was like, that doesn't sound so good to have a separation in your relationship house. And she said, well, you know, it just means that your primary relationship will, you know, your first marriage will end in divorce. And I said to her, well, that's already happened. And she said, well, that's really good because I hate it when it hasn't. And I have to tell someone that. And I was kind of laughing. I was like, yeah, that would be super awkward because not everyone would be open to hearing that. But I was like, well, that's already happened. And she said, yes, but beyond that, what you need to know now is that you're going to, even with right now or the time I was in, I forget, you know, because as you say, it goes through cycles and the planets shift. So it's never fixed either, is my understanding. But as she was reading this kind of live chart, she was explaining to me that there's separation in that relationship house, which was going to show up as me having relationships. And she was like, where, you know, maybe you'll be in partnership with someone, but they won't live in the next street. They might be a little ways away. And I just started laughing because I was in this long distance relationship where literally my partner lived 13 hours away. And she was like, well, that's exactly what this separation in this house will be. It's like you'll be in relationship, but there'll be this element or this necessity to keep it a bit separate for now, a bit safe because it'll be separate, which was absolutely showing up in my life. Like, and if you'd said that to someone else, perhaps there would have been some way it was showing up, but I mean, it just couldn't have been more true as a pattern, as a reality in my life that she, without knowing me, was seeing just in that time in my life through my chart. So
So
yeah.
there's two parts when we read a chart. There's the birth chart, which is like the blueprint, and then the other aspect we look at are the transits. Okay, and the transits are like where the planets are in the sky right now, and how they're influencing your birth chart. And so what she was observing there is the transiting planets and how they were interacting with your chart. I mean, I had a similar thing happen only, it was yesterday. I was talking to my dad on the phone and he was saying, oh, I'm going through this time. And my dad's typically like, he's a dreamer. He's sort of, he's got no earth in his chart. You know, he's not grounded, you know, he's not practical. It's not that kind of thing. And he's like, oh, my mate said the other day that I was so routine and organized. And he's like, what's happened? You know, everything's so like structured and everything has to be perfect. He's like, it's not you at all. But like dad's like, but I need it to be this way right now. And I said to him, I bet you if I have a look at your chart, I bet you're in a progressed moon in an earth sign. Lo and behold, I check in his chart and he's sitting in a Taurus progressed moon. And so what that means is for that 2.5 years, for someone that doesn't have earth energy in his chart, for 2.5 years that his progressed moon is transiting Taurus. And for him, it was Taurus in his second house, which is also ruled by Taurus. So it's like double earth. It's bringing him this earth energy that he's just never had, you know, he's not used to. So he's like, this just feels unusual to me. But he's like, I kind of really like it because I'm getting stuff done and I'm getting things in order and I'm organizing, you know, my finances and I'm organizing my structures and everything's routine. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's going to feel good for the next probably year and a half. And then he's going to shift into a new cycle. So it's funny, like how we feel these energies, and there's times in our life where like, oh, for that 2.5 years, I felt like a social butterfly and I just wanted to be out there. And then, you know, now I just want to be introverted and internal. And if you look at the charts, you're probably transiting from like an air sign, which is, you know, the sociable communications out there, into maybe like a water sign, which is more introspective. So the transits actually play quite a big role in how we feel at this time. And yeah. Yeah.
And so that like, for instance, you know, when people say, oh, Mercury retrograde or Saturn's return, and some people are like, oh, well, I'm not affected by that this round, or, you know, whatever else it is that because so I just want to make sure we're not losing anyone. We've got 12 houses, and
12
we've
houses.
got a birth chart that like is literally like a photograph of where everything was in the sky in those houses when we were born. But then, of course, time is unfolding, and so the planets are still moving around. And so at any moment in time, like right now, today versus next year, the planets will be in a position to affect my birth chart, which today would be different to the planets right where they are affecting your birth chart. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, to put it super simply, every 365 days, we have a solar return. The sun
Yes.
transits all the way around, and it will be in the exact place it was at the time that you were born every year. So, like a Saturn return, which in astrology terms, and particularly in the school that I studied, a Saturn return is one of the most significant returns we have. It happens like every 29 years, but basically, that's how long it takes Saturn to fully orbit, like 29 years. So normally around like 29, 30, 31, if you, and the reason I say there's a bit of a timeline is because planets do go retrograde, which means they go forward and then sometimes they go backwards. Okay, so you could be coming up close to your Saturn return, but if the planet goes retrograde, it might delay it by 6 months. Okay, so it's sort of within that timeline. But if you ask someone typically what's happening around that time of their life, it's usually a significant event, a change in career, a divorce, a move, like a big move, a big transition for studies. Like it's health. A lot of people have like a significant health crisis because Saturn, as far as astrologers are concerned, Saturn's like it's like the old man of the zodiac. He's the one to teach us like our life lesson, our responsibilities, the discipline, what we're here to turn up for, So at that time of our Saturn return, if we're not aligned or if we're not in alignment with where we need to be, Saturn comes in and basically goes, hey, time to get you back on your path, which can be really gentle for some people if they're in alignment, and it can be like it was for me, a sledgehammer coming down and everything just kind of implodes, and then all of a sudden you're on this completely different path you never would have predicted you'd be on. So that's, I guess, when we're talking about, when you hear the term return, essentially all it is the planet coming back to the position it was in at the time that you were born. And all the planets have different orbits, they take a different length of time to do that. So, yeah.
And then for like the whole difference, we've got, and I mean, I know that there's so many elements, but I think it's helpful for people to at least understand, sun sign is how we present. Well, my understanding, please correct me if I say any of this incorrectly, is how we present kind of forward facing. But then we have our moon, and then we have our rising, and that those are, even if you just want to know someone a little better without being a full-blown chart reader, asking someone what their sun, their moon, and their rising is can kind of give you more of an understanding, because it's how they internally interpret. Like if you can explain.
So your sun is the sun is how you sort of show up in your extroverted life. It's your external self-expression. Some people say ego. I think of it more as just like the way you present outwardly to the world. The sun is like the life force, if you think of it that way. The moon represents our more internal world, our introspective world. The moon is how we deal with emotions. So even on like a super simple level, like a lot of people will talk about astrology and relationships. If you want to know anything about your partner, one of the most useful things to know is their moon sign, because that will tell you how they deal with things emotionally. Because, some people will naturally, for example, withdraw when there's a conflict, and you'll get, people that are more direct in conflict will be like, well, why are you running away from me? Why aren't you meeting me head on? But if their moon is in a sign where the natural instinct is to is to recoil, to withdraw, to kind of resource themselves. That's their natural happy place to be. So it's not that they're pulling out from you. That's how they respond. So one of the interesting things that I've found about understanding more about even just the moon is that even in just my relationships with those closest to me, I have like a deeper understanding and a deeper compassion for how they respond in an emotional crisis or an emotional situation. And it allows me then to hold more space for them in the way that they need that space held. Because the truth is that we're all unique and we all need to be held in a different way, but we often want people to show up in the way that we understand, you know? So it's going to feel most comfortable for me if someone could show up emotionally under the same moon influence as me. That's not always going to be the case. So that's the moon. It's one of the most...
I just want to, if you're listening, I've never had anyone describe it like that, Pippa. That's so valuable because, like you're saying, it's the interpretation of how they process their emotions, and that would most likely show up in times of conflict or when they're under stress, yeah, because they're going inward into their processing. And so, yeah, like knowing that about someone, even if they show, and then sometimes you don't have compassion, right? Because it's like, well, they're normally like this. Why are they being different? But that's so huge.
Like
Yeah.
if a moon is in a fire sign, for example, like they're naturally going to be more confrontational, like more, you know, in that space. If their moon is in an air sign, they're going to need to communicate about it. They're going to need to talk about it. They're going to need to write it down, you know. If it's in a water sign, water's more sensitive, it's more intuitive, it's more internal. So they're probably the ones that are going to cry or withdraw, or it's going to be more watery. And then if it's in an earth sign, again, it's going to be like more grounded, practical, rational, you know, tend to be less heated and more like earthy, you know. So even if you don't even think about, is it Taurus or is it Leo, like just, is it one of those four elements? Even that makes a huge difference. You know, if you've got a fire and a water in a relationship, your emotional, in like the way you deal emotionally is like chalk and cheese. So understanding that about each other can be super powerful.
That is huge. That's been, just so you know, for me personally, that's like a game changer right there. Wow, thank you. Okay, so that's moon. And
then your rising sign is like, I like to think of it as like what we're rising up into, like your soul's kind of calling. So it's what we're being called to in this life. So Saturn is more like your life's lesson. Your rising sign is more like your spiritual journey, like that soul's calling or what you're rising into. So kind of, you know, people will often be like asking themselves those deep questions, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I here to do? You know, the rising sign can really bring some useful insight into that for you. And it's not as simple as just one thing, but it certainly holds a lot of weight in terms of the astrology chart. The first three things that we look at are the sun, moon, and the rising. And we also look at just simply what elements they're in as well, you know. So is it like, is your sun, moon, and rising all in earth? Or have you got like one in earth, one in water, one in air? Or have you got, you know, what's the distribution of elements within your sun, your moon, and your rising? Because that's going to say a lot about someone too, you know. Someone that's got one in each is going to be more adaptable and can move with different energies a lot better. If someone's got all three in earth, they're going to be a lot more fixed and stubborn. And so even just a very simple look at the elements between your sun, moon, and rising can inform so much of how you are in this life.
And just with the rising, I have a question, Pip. So say, for instance, your rising is Gemini, you know, does rising then, like, does a star sign, if it's your rising, have certain things that would mean, well, this is part of your life purpose? Or is it again depending on which how, like, is that got to do with the houses and then where the planets are? Or is it
so your rising sign sits on your ascendant, so it's always in the first house, like it's on the ascendant. So that's less influential in a sense, because that's where it sits. It doesn't change. All of our rising signs or ascendants, some people call them, sit there. Okay. But yeah, the sign that it's in is definitely going to indicate that kind of that soul purpose, or that what you're rising up into, what you're here to dive deeper into in this lifetime. So, it's Gemini. Gemini, for example, is an air sign. Gemini is all about communication, writing, reading, self-expression through any one of those mediums. So if your rising sign was in Gemini, then you'd be being called into those activities. You might have this need to journal things, or to write things down, or to share things, or to talk, or so. And it may not necessarily feel natural per se, but you can feel like there's this inkling, I really want to write a book or write a novel, or I can feel this thing inside that I want to do. But I guess as human nature, we question those gut instincts, or those things that we feel. So one thing I really have appreciated about astrology is it allowed me to understand those little voices in my head a lot better, and kind of go, yeah, that's a gut feeling I should go with, versus one that I'm questioning. So I don't know if that makes sense there, but yeah.
And so I suppose, to kind of round out the astrology conversation, is for someone who's like, okay, well, that all sounds really cool, but do I want to know? What if it's bad? You know how some people go, I don't want to go to a clairvoyant because what if they tell me bad things, or, not that, I mean, nothing's neither good nor bad, but you get my point. Or if someone's like, well, if it's all predetermined, then why do I need to know? Shouldn't I just live my life? So, and I actually asked Harlow before jumping on, I said, I'm going to be talking to Pip, and she was excited about astrology for my tribe, so they can understand it better. I said, what did you get from it for you? Keep in mind, she's 13. And she said, well, it just made so much sense, Mom. It just made so much sense about me, and then I said, well, okay, well, what did having it make sense give you then? And she's like, well, just a sense of knowing that who I am is who I'm meant to be, and who I am is a good thing, because it's this is what the universe, this is my you shouldn't use these words, it was slightly different now, the rest she said verbatim, but it's kind of the way she tried to explain it was well, this is kind of my part to play, and I don't need to doubt it or question it or worry about it. And she does have a propensity to be very ruminating in her mind. So to hear her say that was really cool. And actually, what I will say is that, for parents out there, because I'm very intentional with the way I parent, and I have a lot of skills that enable me to parent differently to how I was parented, or how society might want us to parent. But what I will often say is that, even for me, as someone who is very good at seeing big picture and not being overwhelmed with things, that's often a superpower of mine, is I can roll with the punches and put things in perspective, and go to solutions. Pardon?
It's actually in your chart.
There you go. It's in my chart. Yeah. So, well, there you go. It's a superpower of my chart. But I've often looked at my daughters, and they're very different as individuals. And even with my daughter Harlow, and I'll often, if I'm honest, go, where does she get this anxiety from, when both her dad and I are super chill humans? It's not like it's a learnt through observation thing, because I know that even if I'm internally worried about things, you wouldn't really know on the outside. And so when she sort of said that even today, I was like, oh, this is that's helped her to be less anxious, but it's actually in her chart to be someone that worries. And she is Pisces, and she is a teary individual, very much so, which I hold lots of space for, but I know my partner sometimes judges. And so it's interesting what you've just said there. I bet you she's got some kind of water in her moon, because she will immediately go to.
I remember, but Harlow she had a lot of water from memory.
Yeah.
Well, her chart, Yeah.
And she is very watery. She's very teary and very emotional, and very soft, beautiful soul. So I suppose the reason I'm sharing that is, and first of all, I think everybody listening should connect with you and get their chart done. like, and we're going to link to that. And I can't recommend that strongly enough. And then you can make your own decisions what to do with it. But so Pippa's going to answer my question, which I'm going to get to. But I just wanted to throw in there that even as a parent, having your child do it can give us an understanding. They can have an understanding of how and why they're unique and different. But it might also explain why, despite your quote unquote parenting or your example setting, they're not ours to be copies of us. They're here to do their walk their own path, and we're just guardians. And so if we can give them as much space for them to become self-aware and self-accepting and self-expressive, they'll be the magical piece of the universe that they're here to be anyway. So it could be something cool to consider even for your kids. But Pip, what do we say to people who are like, what if it's bad news? What's the benefit to knowing our chart?
The thing is, so to answer your question, like the chart's not like a seal of fate, you know, like it provides you deep insight into who you are, why you're here, what your purpose is. But at the end of the day, we have full autonomy. You know, you can go with it, you can go against it. But the way that, you know, and this will sound woo-woo to some people, but the way that the universe works is it's going to continue to guide you back there. So at some point, you know, it's really nice to know, I think. So good or bad, and there's no such thing as bad in astrology or in my mind. There's the things in your chart that'll feel natural and are almost like natural gifts that you've come with. And then there's things in your chart which present, and we talk about aspects as like opposition or challenges or things to overcome. But anyone who's ever gone things knows on the other side of opposition, on the other side of challenge, on the other side of those things is growth. And usually on the other side of hard things is better things. So if you can learn to, I guess, dive into those aspects of your chart and really work with the challenges or maybe the more difficult stuff, the opportunity for understanding, for growth, and to move beyond them is huge. But not knowing probably means that you're just going to continue to repeat the same cycles over and over again and keep wondering to yourself, why do I keep ending back where I started? Why do I keep repeating these same behaviors in relationships? Why can't I attract this person into my life? Or why can't I hold down this job? Or why? A lot of that stuff you can get insight into by understanding your chart. So for me, there's no harm in getting understanding or getting insight. What you do with it is completely up to you. To the point on parenting or even relationships, like to understand your chart and your partner's chart, anyone that you're in close relationship with, I mean, it's made such a huge difference. Even for myself and my partner, I mean, we've always had a really, like, I don't like to use the word easy because relationships aren't easy. They all require work, but we've always had like a fairly harmonious relationship. But there's always been little parts about him that just drive me nuts. You know, I'm like, why does he keep doing that? Like, you know, and the second I looked into his chart, I'm like, oh, you know, like I've got 5 planets in Earth, right? I'm super grounded. I'm super practical. I like things done a certain way. He's got 5 in fire. He's fun and party and enthusiasm. And, you know, so he'll come in with my 2-year-old son, Oliver, and within the space of maybe 3 minutes, the entire house is turned upside down. You know, they're playing some game and the pillows are everywhere and the toys everywhere. And I come in, I'm like, I left you for 2 minutes. You know, where's the structure? Where's the organization? So instead of me getting frustrated by that now, I can understand that is an innate part of who they are. And I can just kind of I can embrace it and I can enjoy it and I can see it for what it is. And I can hold compassion for those people or those parts that maybe I used to find challenging. So like with children, like, you know, like you said, maybe you do have a child that has a lot of water and they seem to cry all the time, you know, or seem to be overly emotional. You're like, why? Like, what is going on? If you can understand that that is part of their being, instead of trying to toughen them up or to try, you can actually, I guess, help them understand that water element, and you can teach them how to actually work through those kind of heavier emotions that maybe not all people feel the same way. And in doing so, it kind of creates a better bond between the two of you and a whole lot less conflict, which at the end of the day, you know, don't we all really want to live in families that are harmonious with less conflict, you know? And I think the first part of that is in deeper understanding of self, and then those around you. So good, bad, all of the above. It's all tools. It's all tools. It's all learning. It's all insight.
And I will definitely say, you know, I've had some charts read over different stages in my life, and there were elements in those charts that did describe, you know, oh well, there's going to be a tail of this coming back and around, and that'll be for 3 months, and it's just testing if you've learned your lessons. And I remember that particular part, and I was like, oh well, I think I've learned them all, so I think this is going to be sweet. And then, much like you were describing, I got just bashed from one side of the, you know, the squash court to the other, so to speak. And I was like, but as a result, I was like, yeah, you know what, I dead set have not integrated that lesson. Like, and here's my chance. And here's my chance to listen, because, you know, the way I sort of view the astrology, and particularly as we've unpacked it today, is that this is a tool to really help you drop into really the most powerful place to access your true power, which is alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you don't yet have the skills and the tools and the discipline to do it through meditation and stillness and cleansing your physical vehicle and all the different elevation tools that are available to us, but take time, then getting a chart reading can kind of be almost like a cross-reference tool that might give you some insights that might speed up the process of returning back. Because I agree.
It might focus that energy too, because sometimes we're like, you know, do I need to do the meditation? Should I be doing the run? You know, should I be doing the diet? Like, there's all these different things that we think that we should be doing. And sometimes when you get a chart reading, you get deeper insight into like what is like actually at your core. Yes. And what is the stuff that's being bombarded at us that make us think that we should be doing all these things. And it kind of helps you just kind of focus and kind of take away all that external distraction and go, okay, what is it that I need for me, for my being, for who I am, so that I can thrive? And that doesn't have to look the same as everyone else around me. That can be quite unique to who I am, because we're all unique. And I guess to your question, like earlier on, like why the meditation, why the Ayurveda, why the yoga? Because everyone is unique. Everyone needs different tools. Everyone needs to find out what works for them, what brings out the best in them and their being. So, you know, I started my journey as a dietitian. I went into Pilates, and I guess, you know, the more I learned, the more I started to realize like this one thing can't fix everyone. It takes like a really multidisciplinary approach. And then I guess why astrology is because astrology provides the insight to then be able to go, which of the tools of all these different modalities are going to be most helpful to me and they're going to help me the most. And so I guess in unraveling my own personal journey, I've gone there because, you know, I'm that kind of person. I like to glean knowledge from everywhere I can. But now to then be able to share those insights with people, but not just share the insights of like, here's your chart, but like, here's your chart. Now here's some tools and some practices that are going to work to help you with that. To me, that's invaluable. Because it's like the insight and the opportunity to apply practice, you know?
I think if someone really dives into this with an open mind, and an open heart, what they may end up finding is that it gives them permission to let go of the shoulding that can waste a lot of time with. And, you know, I'm a bit of an advocate for, sure, go and test and trial things. And, you know, I think you and I are much the same. Like we're willing to go and test and trial, but what we do to come into alignment is we sit in self-inquiry and we discern. So we're willing to go, that doesn't feel right. That's a yes from me. That's a no from me. But that takes time. And so if someone, you know, can get a chart reading, go, oh, based on where my you know elements are, based on where they are in the houses, no wonder I can't stand HIIT training and high intensity sweating exercises.
Stop doing it.
They're only here for the, the yin yoga and the Pilates or whatever it is, because they'll get, and then it'll be like this. You'll hear, I think what the
It's a
charts are,
permission slip.
it's a permission slip. Yeah. It's like someone goes, yeah, that's what I already know deep in my core.
And you do
Now
know
that
it, because
you
every time you
said it,
turn up to do HIIT, there's
yes.
something inside you that just goes, oh, I just don't want to
But
be
then,
here.
but instead of us going, oh, that's not aligned for me, we're like, oh, I need to be more like her or him because he loves it. Why can't I love it? Whereas in this case, it can be like,
I should do it because that's
yeah,
what everyone else does, you know. Yeah.
now it'll be like, oh, well, because Jupiter's in my whatever house, and now that's why I like it like this. And it'll just feel, it almost gives, it feels good to be you because you know that that's who you're meant to be. So I think that that is a big yes to getting your chart read. And of course, as with everything, you could get your chart read and go, oh, that didn't make any sense to me. I got no truth from that. I doubt that that would happen, to be honest. But if that's where you're at and that's your experience of it, it might also take some time until those truths feel like truths, because you might still be so far from your alignment that you can't feel that sense of it yet. So, Pip, quick rapid fire questions now. Okay. What would be your number one tip? Because you have lots of experience in health and wellness and so many other things as well. What would be your number one tip to a listener who wanted to elevate their energy today? What would you advise that they do?
Elevate their energy.
What would you do to elevate your energy?
I mean, it's going to sound, but I would, first of all, I'd meditate. I know that sounds counterintuitive because it's like meditation to elevate my energy. But the thing is when you can turn all the external off and you can actually go in and resource your energy and you, then when you come back out into the world, you can express as you in your energy and in your highest vibration, and you're not allowing those external forces to suck your energy. So yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but as a general, I would say that's been a difficult learning for me, because if you said to me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have laughed at that. I would have been like, you got to be kidding, go for a run, or eat high vibrational foods, or like there would have been 1,000 other answers I would have given you. But really, it really is one of the most powerful tools.
Yeah, no, I get a sense of that. I know when I meditate, it's very energy restoring, because the stories have stopped and they steal so much of our energy. Yeah, the shoulds and the woulds and the coulds and
the constant running of your mind, whether you realize it or not, just zaps your energy. It takes away from where you can put your focus, because without even realizing it, your subconscious is busy trying to solve a million things. And when you can kind of turn that off and just stand in, the present, all of a sudden you've got so much more energy to give to the things that are right in front of you, and you stop worrying about what happened before or what's going to happen later. So yeah.
Love it. And what would be your number one tip to elevate the experience of empowerment, like feeling, I mean, it could very well be the same thing, but what would you do to get a sense of empowerment?
Understanding the things that you tend to shy away from, the things that are hard to do, the things that are uncomfortable, and instead of hiding from them, stepping into them. Because I think when we can learn to work with those difficult aspects of ourselves, or some people call it the shadow sides of ourselves, and we can kind of face them and kind of like walk into them, there's nothing more empowering than that. There's nothing more empowering than knowing that that thing you thought was holding you back can't hold you back anymore. And so like, just, yeah.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
Love that. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And then what would you suggest to elevate expression? Your expression in the world, or your expression in a relationship, or creatively, like whatever that means to you, your expression.
Well, firstly, understanding how it is that you express. I think until you know how you personally express, it's hard to elevate your expression. And then once you understand what is your, I guess, go-to way of expressing, then working with that tool. So like some people really struggle to deliver how they feel in words, but if you ask them to write it down, they can do it perfectly, or vice versa. Someone can, you know, speak it perfectly, but they can't write it. So I think, yeah, to kind of elevate the way you express, the first step is to really ask yourself, where is it that I feel most comfortable expressing? And then I guess the other part to that is, once you've really honed what feels good, is to then look at the bit that doesn't. You know, why can't I say what I feel? Why can I only write it down? Where is that block coming from? And then diving into that part. But I think, you know, initially that can be really tough to do. So the first step is just, you know, really understanding what feels comfortable and practicing that.
Play your strengths initially. Love that. Okay, so let's say, Pip, that this entire podcast, which is not going to happen, got deleted, and the only thing we could put out into the world, or the only thing anyone could hear, would be the next sentence. But this little sentence from Pippa about life, kind of like a hey team, I know I said all that other stuff, but this, of all the things, is kind of the most important, or this is simply my mantra or my truth. If I distilled it all down, this is really what's important. What would you have us know, or what would you share?
That's a big question.
I know it does feel quite momentous in its pressure.
Yeah.
Less about it.
Especially for a perfectionist like me. Okay. Be you, learn all about you, dive into you as much as you possibly can. Be comfortable being who you are. Don't try to be someone else. The things that are unique about you, they're not weird, that they're special, that's your gifts, they're your gifts. Your journey that you've gone through, the challenges, the triumphs, that's your gift, that's your message, that's what you're here for. So if there's anything that I've learned, is you're here to do you. And that's not in a selfish, from a selfish perspective, that the most selfless thing we can do is turn up or show up as our authentic self, you know. So yeah, do you.
Yeah.
And get to know you, and quieten all the other stuff, and get comfortable with all your unique things, all the
Awesome.
unique parts of you.
I agree. And you know, that's why I'm such an advocate for the growth work, the inner work, the self-development work, because it's the only work. If we just learn how to be more of ourselves, each of us individually around the entire planet, and we realized how enough that was, and just how perfect it already is, and it doesn't need to be edited or changed, or
it doesn't even need to be learned. That's the other thing, is like a lot of people go, oh, yeah, I've got to learn. You don't have to learn so much who you are. You just have to remember, because it's actually all there. It's just under layers and layers of influence from all different aspects of our life. You know, and not to say that influence, or, you know, a lot of people say conditioning is a negative thing. It's not. But sometimes in influencing, conditioning, and taking on board all these things, we forget who we are. We forget our own essence. So, you know, getting back to that, I think that's the most important thing we can all do. And then everything from there, it's going to flourish, you know.
amen. Agreed. Yes, well, Pippa, thank you so much for this juicy conversation. And yeah, like I've learned so much, and I'm really hoping, if you're hoping that if you're listening, one, that you learn a little bit more about astrology, that Pippa's sharing on meditation, and just this willingness to drop into a different way of being. And, you know, that's been a thread really throughout this conversation, whether it was your journey from yang to a bit more yin, or even as you just shared before, like empowerment comes from pushing into those edges or those places and spaces that feel a little less comfortable just through our habituation of ourselves over time. So, you know, if you were going to take a lesson from today, let that be it. And as you go into the world today, ask yourself, what am I doing out of habit that maybe doesn't serve me anymore or never really did? And if I did it just how I wanted to, or if I just felt into it and trusted myself from the very core, how could I say it different? How could I see this differently? How could I do this differently? And let that be a guide today, because I think that could and would really change your reality. So Pip, unless you've got anything further you wanted to share or some last minute thoughts, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know I adore you and I miss you, and I'm so deeply grateful to you and the work that you do. You're just such a light, and I love you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm.
It's been a pleasure.
Mm. And we will link to everything, and everyone should be and just so you know, like with Pip, even though she's in Chicago, actually one of her timelines syncs up really well with Australia, and you can just book via the link in her app. You just go in and it's all incredibly affordable, and you just click the link and you book the time and it's done, and you will get so much goodness from that. So, you know, whether it's gifting yourself something just because you're curious and you want it, or a birthday gift or a Mother's Day gift coming up, just yeah, consider
Just to
getting your
that,
birth chart read. Yeah, 100%.
just to that too, if there isn't a time, I have just done recordings so that you know you don't have to be present. I can just record it and send it to you, and then you can always come back to me with questions, because I know
Wow.
there's 14-hour time difference between here and Perth, or so that is always an option for those that really want to do it. And I record the live ones as well, so that you've obviously can go back and re-listen. But that's an
really
option too.
genius, Pip. Like as from a business coaching perspective, that's genius, because that's really true. Like if someone could give it, then you know, for a lot of people, they might start listening to that over 2 nights at, you know, for some people who've got that kind of lifestyle at 10 p.m. at night, where normally they can't book a practitioner, and they could listen, and then if they had questions they could send it back, and then you come back. That's unbelievably, because truth be told, initially you are just listening to everything that this person is reading from your chart. It's like going
it's a
to
lot of information.
Bible or the encyclopedia of, you know, Sarah Smith. It's like, let me tell you what this chart says about Sarah. And you are reading. And so even be cool to be able to pause, to take loo breaks and pause to rewind and hear that bit again. I think that's actually, I mean, I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but like, that's amazing. I just snaps to you, beauty. I think that's brilliant. Yeah. So no excuses. Everyone should book. Okay. Yeah. And I really hope you do. And if you do, please, you know, let me and Pippa know. And if anything we shared in this podcast today hit a chord, or you learned something, then remember, we are all connected, as Pippa said, you know, galactically, energetically, but definitely as human to human, we are, you know, so interrelated. We are not separate. So if something hit a chord with you, sharing it into your tribe, it's going to resonate with others too. And that's how we can all support one another. So we would love to be tagged on social media. Do that. Let us know what hit a chord, even through messages. It's so appreciated. All right. Big loves to everyone. And thank you so much, Pip, again. And thank you to those who tuned in and listened and journeyed with us. Big loves to you all. I see you. I am you. I love you. And live your light, magnify your more, and step into your wholeness, because that's all the world needs you to do. Big loves.